you joining us.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Derek. So the Smartroller, this is exciting for me because I think I'm going to assume that some people didn't get to see what I talked about yesterday, but also bring you up a little bit further and be more specific with regard to the Smartroller. Just to back it up, I love that Derek is referring to somatic education, and it's a different way to learn when you are in the movement science field. So I'm really appreciating that it's starting to really percolate up for people to start looking into it. We know a variety, there's so many different somatic practices. Soma is from the Greek word body and soma, and it was actually Thomas Hanna, who was a student of Dr. Feldenkrais. And it was really looking at how do we embody learning and how do we do it without overtaking it from what we call top down processing, our thinking brain to direct us. That's important that we have that. We want that. You wouldn't go to a surgeon that didn't have some top down processing. But you also, when it comes to movement and movement integration, you really need to have both. You need to have, and bottom up is that your sensory system is providing you with a field of data. So the question becomes, and my background is, as I've mentioned, is very strongly influenced by the Feldenkrais method. And as a PT, I have felt it's been my point to try and bring it out to people because it's been so effective for my practice, for my teaching, and so forth. But it's not an easy thing to understand and to access. And so that's why I made the products, and we'll go through each one. And I want to try and make something that seems rather abstract into being a little bit more concrete. And if you're up for it, I'd like to just bring you through, and I don't have somebody to see, but just bring you through a series of things to get a sense of the essence of what I'm referring to. Okay, so body awareness, well, self-awareness. I mean, we really operate in a world that we have to be aware of monitoring situations. So we have a certain self-awareness, and body awareness is particularly a relationship of how we know what is going on because our body is telling us that feedback. We are using it through the portals of our senses. And if we're really healthy, those sensory systems are integrated to give us the knowledge of how to be present, how to be in your state of awareness. So the question came up yesterday, and I'd like to kind of hit it again. So how do you introduce body awareness? How do you start with that? And I think I've mentioned its value because it really sets the stage for somebody to learn in a unique way. So it's, first of all, body awareness kind of is an abstract concept, and it's not necessarily, we know we want it, we don't necessarily know how to improve it. So the Smartroller was designed to try and help utilize that ability to try and be more conscious of what your habits are and what your habits that you might want to refine or work with can be dealt with. So let's talk about a body scan. So there is a setup, and I'm going to use the format. And I want to thank an educator that I just listened recently, and she gave a really good organizational way of looking at, and it's Paris Kern, a Feldenkrais educator. But I want to give you the format of an awareness through movement lesson. And this is how I approach using the Smartroller. And I would use this with the idea of postural education. And I find most people have a default posture that they subscribe to. They do it a lot. And the problem with teaching posture, with that top-down processing, to correct it, it tends to utilize only the parts that are well sensitized, and it forgets the other parts. And when you lose out with that many elements, it will just refer back to what it knows. That's how it happens. And you will always be playing catch up. And one other thing is when you do try and correct it, and an anatomical correction, let's say pull your shoulders back or straighten your spine, you are going to probably load it with tension. And I don't think that's what we want if we want spontaneous movement and action. So Dr. Feldenkrais actually gave us a new word, and he called it axure. So in other words, he meant moment-to-moment alignment. So if we kind of think about posture being a little less static and how we can kind of refine it. So one of the things, and I'll try and, if we have time, step you through a little bit of process, but let me take you to the roller first. So let's say I want to first set up the conditions for learning. I would have somebody, if they're comfortable, lie on the floor and have them just pay attention. And I would go systematically having them observe themselves. And I mentioned that it kind of helps them just kind of listen in, down regulate a little bit. So they remove a little bit of the tension. And what I might do is I may highlight certain things. I just happened to notice when I took a history, I watched that they really preferred sitting on one side through the whole conversation, which kind of made them have this interesting architectural curve to the way they sit. So when I see them lying down, now I know gravity's away and I can see how much of that is taken over. So I may use a scan that helps them kind of notice parts of themselves that they didn't notice before. And then I can take it to movement. So I'm going to take them onto the Smartroller, and I would use the purple side, the flat side. And I think I mentioned yesterday, and I'll mention it again, the reason it isn't just a half roller, and I think you might be able to see this. We kept part of the roller shape, but we arced it. So if you can see that, if we go from here to here, you can see that there is a shape, there's a dome. So when I say these are, I'm going to turn around not to confuse you. So when I say that I'm going to do the purple side up, I'm giving the rocker motion to be on the bottom. Now, this is set up to be anatomically friendly, not to put somebody so much into an arc that their breath is changing. Because I really want this to be so subtle, because I want the information that comes in to be what's the driver of attuning or attending to that awareness, the body awareness element. So now I will introduce movement. And the first thing I ask them is, if you were to tip over to one side more easily than the other, do you know which side it would be? You might notice that I'm asking questions as opposed to telling them and directing them. So what that does, it drops in, that person can feel, because even though they're lying on their back, they're posturing and they're balancing, but I've offloaded it enough that I can give them more sensory feedback to notice what they're doing. That helps them. If they feel, they just listen, and then they can start to realize there's a difference between the two sides, but not intellectually, but they feel it. They feel those two sides being interesting, different. So then I will ask, and it just depends. I will direct them through very small, slow movements to get them to start seeing what happens to these architectural shapes that we're feeling when movements are introduced. The rocking is so subtle, it's so easy that it allows them to just come up with what they do. Now, as a practitioner, and I want to speak to both, because if you're doing it for yourself and if you're doing it to work as an educator, I get to watch. I get to watch where they close off their movement. Think of it as any kind of systemic element where you want to see how the system actually is communicating to itself. I can watch them if they lock their pelvis in place. And I'm not saying it's wrong. Maybe they've learned to protect something, but we need to figure that out. Maybe they used to do it and they still do it now, and the protection is no longer necessary. What I want is a certain amount of integration to all the parts and a freedom to move in as easy way as possible. So then I might have them, as they're shifting back and forth, pay attention to their feet, because their feet and their arms are on the floor right now. They're giving probably the most feedback. And this is when I will use some meta concepts, meta awareness things. I might say, do you notice your toes? What do you sense? And I'm not asking, and I'll be clear, I don't want their feedback to report. I just want them to go in their guidance system, because I want to develop their attention for a period of time so that there's enough change that I can get them to be aware of how they can deal with that later on. So I might notice that they may involuntarily not know it, but they stop letting the ankle shift in one side. So I play with that. I'll play with it, but it doesn't really matter. You don't need these skill sets. You can just know that this is a tool, a tuning fork that gives you a lot of possibilities. But let's say that I'll have them do that. I'll see if they're bracing the position of their head, which is really interesting because the freedom of the head, and we're doing such subtle rocking motion, is important because that tells us if the spine wants to hold as a chain and it immobilizes pieces. So I'd like to see if they maybe they don't feel safe or whatever it is, but may ask them to let their eyes open and just let their eyes and pay attention to how their eyes may be drifting one side more than the other. Let's say they have a desk setup and I will have them start thinking that way, that maybe they can play with their workstation situation so that they don't have such of a repetitive pattern that kicks in so quickly. So, but then the next step of it, so we've gone from the body scan, the movement part of it, and then I'll ask them not to get up, which is really important because if somebody snaps up from that position, then there's a certain tonic element that they're going to bring back in. So the shape of it was designed so that it's easy. They can be on there for a little while and not find discomfort. The follow part is that it's like a spatula. So when you are just starting to come off the roller, you can sustain contact with it for a long time and let them just guide themselves to the floor, and then I push it out of their way, or if they're doing it on their own, they move it away. Now, a few things happen. One, if they didn't change at all, it really explains to me, if I physically see that they haven't changed, which rarely happens, but it could be that the tonicity, the tone in their body is so dense and tight and there's a lot of reasons I could investigate that there's fear of some kind. But I'm not going to go down that road. I want you just to know, let's say that I see, which I usually do, I see symmetrical changes, which you got to ask the question, why is that? Why we didn't do anything specifically to require them to do something to equalize the two sides. Well, if you notice when you're watching, the rocking motion is having that person, if you think about how the system's regulating that motion, it's crossing the midline and it's got a physicality to have to find that neutral central place. Okay, these are my speculations. I'm sure, they're just what I believe is happening. So then on top of which, I noticed that their ankles rest down more. So that means they got rid of what's considered the anterior compartment, which tends to be really tight for people when they're sitting at long periods of time. They forget that they don't need those muscles on. And the anatomical of the curves can change. And then the conversation can come up. So as I have them come up, have them rise to standing, they still feel the effects of standing. And I may ask them to walk around and just have them notice what they notice. So that's how I approach body awareness. And this whole thing can take less than 10 minutes. But the important part is how much the setup is. You want to set the conditions up. People will do things the way they do things. And they'll be really, the biggest challenge for us is to sit back and pay attention without having to have the answers right away. And my sister's a teacher, and I'll never forget when she came one time to a class I taught, and somebody, I forget what prompted the question, but she said, she responded to them. She goes, when somebody's having challenges with reading, they're just learning to read, we let them sit in that discomfort for just a little while, because that unknown moment, we know that they're building the blocks that are necessary for learning. That really was awesome, because I thought my tendency is to want to quickly give them, a response and figure it out. But if I rob them of that experience, then I rob them of the functional capacity for them to make choices that will have some difference. So just wanted to go through that, explain how those things work a little bit. And I'm going to give you just a moment to think about this. And I don't have anybody to do this with, so I will be doing it. And hopefully, if you are moving along with me, you can do it yourself. So let's think about sitting posture. So now I gave you the Smartroller, but let's stay on the theme of body awareness. And how does body awareness carry over so that the monkey is not on anybody's back. Your back is doing what it's supposed to do, and that's to regulate. So if you're sitting and you're sitting at the edge of your chair, take a moment just to notice how well could you get a snapshot picture of the front, the back, and the sides of yourself? Can you get a sense how symmetrical are you? Is one shoulder, don't change it, don't correct it, don't even pay attention first, and then you can fidget. But if you fidget, do micro movements. We're really about the smallest amount, because there's an actual physical law called the Weber-Fechner law. The smaller the stimulus, the higher the sensitivity. And the way you can think about that is, let's take the auditory sense, and somebody whispers. You have a room, people are talking, somebody whispers, that's right there, you lean in. But what's also processing is the neural connections in your nervous system are drawing your attention to that particular stimuli. Now, let's say somebody's in the room talking, you have noise in the room, but let's say somebody is talking just out of earshot, but you hear your name. And let's just face it, there's a reason why labels and certain things we respond to. You hear that name and your attention, because whatever it's about, you just got something to perk that up. So when I say the smaller the stimuli or the micro movements and reducing pain, so the noise is down, and reducing body tension, that noise is down, it's for that reason. I need them to feel all the moving parts, and they are moving because you're breathing. So there's a relationship, and you're balancing, and you're moving, and you're gesturing, and you're doing the things that you do. That being said, go back to your scan. Now, the next question is, if I asked you to stand up at this moment, don't do it, but just if I asked you to stand up, see if you can sense how you approach that. How do you, what is the signals that you notice? Like, would you adjust your feet first? Would you have tipped your pelvis first? Would you have paused your breath? Would you have done something that you've been instructed to do, tighten your abdominals, maybe tighten your glutes, whatever it is? You need to invite the question, is it going to be helpful? Because if you are navigating like a child who can rise out from a squat without, most children rise out of a squat, there isn't bracing their abdominals, firing the glutes. And now, forgive me if this disrupts people's understanding, but just think about it for a moment. So if you now start to get ready to stand up, just think about the combination of things that you do. And as you think in that preparatory way, because our brains are preparing for us, they are anticipatory, our brains, then I want you to rise up to stand. So I'll just tilt that so I don't, have to see me that way. And then, knowing where you're sitting, you sit back down. Now, I'm not going to keep repeating that, but I will continue for me to do it. But I'm going to have you follow this. So now you can see how this is going. How did you stand up? Did you notice? Did you hold your breath? Now, if you were to give it preparation, we don't have time for it, but you may ask somebody to relax their ankles. Maybe shift their heels a few times. Maybe rock their pelvis, whatever it is, and then have them come up, but then coming back down so that it's just as easy to come down in slow motion. You can see how we're doing an awareness through movement. And then as they finally sit down, just feel that. And that alone will have somebody erect their spine and sit probably with a good balanced support. And I want to point that out because it's what we can do for ourselves and for everybody else to address these posture wars of how to be in a dynamic, actionable state. Okay, the time, I'm going to reach out to Derek and see if he has some questions that we can answer.
Oh, sorry. Had a little issue with my my video kicking on there. Yeah, we actually did get a few questions that were submitted, Stacy, before today's talk. So we have 2 questions, but before we get to those, for those of you who are planning on only a 20-minute conversation, I wanted to make sure we noted before you leave that 2 things. One, if you are interested in purchasing any of Stacy's products, Smartroller Sits, or the links, or the package, including the guide, you can use the code SMART10 to save 10%. And that's now through the 19th. So yeah, definitely take advantage of that. It's a great offer. Stacy, the ebook that's available, you want to speak to that real quick too? I think that's a great resource for people who want to learn more.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Derek. And yes, what I did is I pulled a little bit from the Smartroller guidebook, which I meant to put in front of me. That lays out lots of little vignettes of what I just did to try and help walk yourself through some ways to heighten body awareness. And then I take it into the progression of going from there to functional activities at home, lifting something, swinging a golf club, not specifically, but in the global sense. And I took a portion of that out, and I particularly addressed the rocking motion. And that's in a free PDF book that is in the link that's in the chat there. So, and please reach out to me. I'm very available. I'm on every social media platform there is, because I found it difficult to understand this work. But as I've come to understand it, I want to share it. I want people to really grasp these ideas better.
Great, thanks. Yep, and like Stacy said, that link is in the chat box here on Zoom. And for those of you who are on Facebook, we'll make sure we drop that into the comments once this is posted, and you'll be able to access it that way as well. One of the questions that was asked, Stacy, just I guess someone's looking for maybe a big picture perspective. I believe it was a Pilates instructor that asked how you commonly see the Smartroller being integrated into small group Pilates classes, and what benefits participants can receive, or what are we training towards within through using the product.
Great. I love that question. I would love and I have taught group Pilates classes, and we actually did some photos before, during, and after. And it was my Pilates teacher, so it was real. I felt like we really got to mix a combination of things. What we did is what I talked about, that beginning scanning process, and we used the roller to integrate into the sensation of the felt sense. And that would be a good way to and you don't have to spend a lot of time with it, but then you can reflect back on the information that I would actually have them do that brief thing with what we just talked about. This is just one thing that comes off the top of my head. Have them do that very short element of preparation. If it's a group class that it's intimate enough, you could have them, if they're comfortable, talk a little bit about it. That really helps. There's something about the form. We know community language really builds people's understandings of a felt sense. Doesn't have to happen, but if that's possible. And then take them to, if it's a mat class or if it's equipment based, take them to that. But can you help with what you discovered as the educator, some elements that were common themes for that, what you saw with them, because that gave you so you broke it down so well to see what their baseline informational system is doing. On the student side, they're going to be more ready. They're going to be out of they're going to be out of harm's way better, in my opinion, because they're not going to be so committed to their postural habits. So they'll have a little bit of play. We definitely impact the fascia here. The fascia is the system, the neural system. It's rich. So we don't want to just affect it by changing it directly. We want the directal system to be much more informed, so that it goes back and forth. So, and then I may have them come back, and I might have them, do a workout. It's good to get them to move their muscles and feel the skeletal elements and how they organize, which is really the word that we use more than posture. Is how does somebody self-organize their mobility? And then I take them back to the floor and maybe have them do just a tiny bit to kind of close the session.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. And for people who are looking for more information, and this covers more of a broad spectrum, so not just for Pilates, OPTP's website, we have a lot of information on the Smartroller there, the ebook that Stacy referenced, and of course, Stacy's social media accounts, and OPTP is also frequently posting using Smartroller. So a lot of resources out there Yeah.
Can I actually, if you do sign up for the ebook, then I can actually let you know I do plan to do classes for professionals and general public in 2023. So I just need to get my calendar together. So I would love, 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 and it'll probably be hybrid. I do have access to a studio that I will be using in West LA, but that's something I definitely want to do. What, you know, it's just getting enough interest to see where things fall. So.
Perfect. Okay. Great. I'll just jump right into the last question here, which was another kind of general question that someone asked regarding posture, how you find people using Smartroller to help improve posture. I know there's probably, you could talk about that for a long time, but maybe just your big picture, 2-minute overview.
Yeah, and I know not everybody's on social media, but if you go to Smartroller on Instagram, you can access Linktree, and I put everything there. I actually wrote some Huffington Post blogs, and so there's a group of them there. I even talked about the posture on high heels and a lot of things. So please, there's a lot of places to get access to that. So that posture is a really, it's such a great place to look at how to be, because posture is not, it's not binary. It's not good and bad. What happens is people get stuck in a posture. So what's fascinating is when you ask them to slump, they actually have lost range of motion in slumping because there's enough of a signaling that they know is taboo. They can get too locked into extension. And when I work with somatic teachers, sometimes that happens. Their yoga postures have taken over to everyday everything, but we have to bend. I mean, that was my story as somebody, as a PT, just erecting my spine all the time. And I realized I couldn't do a judo roll. I couldn't flex. I couldn't fall in a way that would be less harmful. So it's important to recognize we need many, 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 many postures to be in good posture. So the other part of it is check your breath. If you are in a habit of pausing your breath, you can't write that by just saying, stop it. Okay. One of the things is when you are practicing on the Smartroller and you're attending to your breath, you will actually regulate not holding it so much. So that's a big thing, because if you're holding your gut, you're diminishing the movement of the diaphragm on a regular basis. And you're not necessarily going to be ready to twist and turn or get out the door. We want to be able to be spontaneous as if we are martial artists. And that's the postural choice that we're looking for.
Perfect, Stacy. Thanks. Yeah. Well, we don't have much more time. We have another minute until we hit the 30-minute mark. So I think we should probably wrap things up here. But I want to quickly note tomorrow and Friday, we also have talks with Stacy. We have one tomorrow at the same time. This one will be on Smartroller links. So we're going to be spending a little bit more time on that product exclusively. Friday will be on the sits. So again, as part of Somatic Education Week, we're focusing and kind of modifying the discussion a little bit based on these products and what their benefits are. But of course, positioning all of that under the big somatic education umbrella. So this will be on Facebook after we are done later today. If you want to watch the recording, eventually I'm sure you'll also see the recording through a blog post on optp.com. We'll probably put it on YouTube as well. But if you want more immediate access to it, it will be on our Facebook page later today. And that's pretty much it from me. Stacy, you have any final words here?
Nope. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah. Yep. Feel free to join us tomorrow, guys, through the same means, through Facebook events. If you didn't check it out yet, there's some information on those events in the description of on the page. So thanks for joining us, and we will plan on seeing everyone tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks.